Good evening, everyone. I'm glad you could join us for tonight's webinar. Last week, we discussed everything you needed to know about state FHEPS. However, tonight we'll discuss city FHEPS and the application process. Here to provide this training tonight is Susan Bond and Andrew Tsai, both attorneys at the Legal Aid Society. We're so glad to have them with us. So, Robert, could you put up their presentation? And Susan and Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jakari.
Okay, like Jakari mentioned, I'm a supervising attorney with the Legal Aid Society. I practice on Staten Island. And Susan is a staff attorney and practices in Brooklyn. These are our emails. If you have any questions after the presentation and we weren't able to get to them, you can feel free to send us an email. Next.
So this is a list of our attorneys who work on FHEPS and city FHEPS issues, and they are, so we're divided by each borough. And we currently have a new lawyer who just joined the team in Harlem named Tracy. And some of you may be from the Bronx, and we have 3 lawyers from the Bronx. And these are emails. And if you don't have email, contact Palente and we'll get in touch and set up a phone call. So we're available to ask questions during the work week. And we look forward to hearing from you if you have any problems. Next.
Okay, city FHEPS. The H is silent. So we don't call it, some people call it FHEPS, but we've just been calling it city FHEPS. It started in October 29th, 2018. They consolidated all the links, SEPs, and there used to be a program, City FHEPS without the H. They all consolidated into this City FHEPS program with the H. To qualify, the income must be equal to under 200% of the federal poverty guideline for the first year. After the first year, your income can be slightly higher at 250%. A future slide will show you what those amounts are. Everyone who is eligible to have income in the household, they must have some income. So if someone in the household does have income, they should apply for public assistance because that would count as income. Where you see this issue sometimes is when there's like a young adult in the household and they don't want to necessarily want to comply with the program requirements for public assistance. If that's the case, then they can't be in a city FHEPS household. A household member who is not in receipt of cash assistance, they have to pay 30% of their gross income. That would be their share of the rent. So it's similar to Section 8. If they are on cash assistance, their share of the rent would be the shelter allowance, which is paid for by public assistance. The program is mostly to leave the shelter. There's a smaller program in the community to avoid shelter entry. So we have city FHEPS out of the shelter or city FHEPS in the community, right? So someone who is in eviction proceedings and hasn't necessarily entered the shelter system yet, right? They may be eligible for city FHEPS in the community to move to a new apartment or to even stay in the current apartment.
And tonight we're just going to talk about city FHEPS in the community because all the shelter rules are a bit different. Leaving shelter are a bit different. And there's a flyer about that on the city's website if you want more information, if you have a friend or family member in the shelter system. Next. So the differences between the two programs the big difference with city FHEPS from FHEPS is the family does not have to, the person or family doesn't have to receive cash assistance. The income the first year must be at or below 200% of the federal poverty line, and the second and subsequent years 250% of the federal poverty line. And as Andrew said before, everybody who's not on cash assistance must pay 30% of their gross income. If somebody doesn't have immigration status, they don't have to pay a share, but they don't count as towards the maximum rent in the house. And city FHEPS in some ways is better than FHEPS because it's available for singles, adults, couples, adult families, as well as some families with minor children. Next.
Okay, here's the chart for the federal poverty guidelines. So what we are looking at is, remember, to qualify for city FHEPS, you have to be within 200%. So that's, you have to have income at or below the two columns, well, the third column here, yearly.
And then there's monthly next to it.
Yeah, or monthly.
Next. So they're like the FHEPS program. There is an eviction or homelessness requirement that is being waived during the pandemic through August 31st. So households can get city FHEPS without a lawsuit. After August 31st, we'll probably be going back to the rule that everybody in the community has to have a eviction proceeding, or a city agency told them they had to vacate their apartment because it wasn't safe, or there's a foreclosure action and they can't stay, or there's sometimes another health and safety reason that a government agency has said, hey, this apartment's not safe. We had a case a bunch of years ago with a family was living in a studio with 5 people, and there was a young teenager who was sleeping in the kitchen next to the stove because she was older than her siblings. And ACS was called in and they said, hey, they need a bigger apartment. So they were very lucky. They got to move to a 2-bedroom apartment with city FHEPS, and it was a much better situation for everybody. Next.
Oh, something I want to mention about that waiver of the eviction requirement. They've part of the reason why it's been waived is because of the eviction moratorium. So if somehow the eviction moratorium gets extended, right, we expect that waiver requirement to also be extended, but that's a huge if. Okay, sorry, next.
You're
sorry.
up.
Yeah, sorry. So to get city FHEPS, the household must include a U.S. veteran. You have to reside in and can save a rent-controlled apartment. So it has to be rent-controlled. It doesn't, if your apartment is rent stabilized, which the number of rent stabilized apartments far outnumber the number of rent controlled apartments. If it's rent stabilized, you would not qualify for city FHEPS under this requirement. It's only apartments that are rent controlled, and those are very rare. You have to have history, or you can have history in a DHS shelter only. That's Department of Homeless Services, one of that city agency's shelters. So if if a tenant has shelter history in an HPD shelter, they wouldn't fall under this category. Or they have to be,
or an HRA shelter, which is for domestic violence. That would not qualify for this either.
Yeah, they may qualify for some other program though. but not for city FHEPS. They have to be in receipt of APS, that's Adult Protective Services or Community Guardianship Program. They have to be receiving their services. Or this one is very rare. I haven't seen this one. It's an individual who is referred through a qualifying program through ACS, the Administration for Child Services, the Three-Quarter Housing Task Force, the DYCD, Department of Youth and Community Development, or the DOC, I think that's Department of Correction, right?
Right.
Susan?
I've only seen one case with the ACS. And that was under the old City FHEPS program.
Yeah.
Next. So the documents you need to prove you qualify for the program are having discharge papers from the armed services, the U.S. Armed Services, or so that would be for a veteran. For somebody who's in a rent-controlled apartment, which Andrew discussed was really rare, you would have to be in a building that was generally built before 1947, or a tenancy that started before 1971. Sometimes the landlord is required to put in court papers if the apartment is rent controlled or rent stabilized, or doesn't have a rent regulation status. So sometimes that would be in the court papers. For somebody who had been in the shelter system, there's a computer program called CARES, the CARES computer system. And that computer would have the dates when family members in the household had been in the Department of Homeless Services shelter system. And that system goes 30 years back. So, and you only have to have been in the shelter system for one night to qualify for City FHEPS, but it has to be that special Department of Homeless Services shelter system. Another way to prove the household has adult protective services, generally that agency would give the tenant a letter. We're giving Susan Bond at Adult Protective Services, or there had been a case in the Supreme Court in New York where they've assigned a community guardian because it was decided that a person couldn't take care of their own property or person. And for the other referral from one of those only few, very limited government agencies, it's not any agency, it's only the 4 that are listed in the rules. They would have to give a referral in writing, and it has to be approved at a high level. So that's very rare. That might only happen where there's a very sick person in the house. Andrew?
Okay, so you say, for example, you qualify for City FHEPS. How does it sort of work? So you get a shopping letter. This is for City FHEPS to, you get a shopping letter, okay. And that is done by Homebase. And if they are for example, already in receipt of City FHEPS and they are sued in housing court in a holdover proceeding, meaning the landlord wants the property back, or if there's a health and safety need for a move, right? Then the tenant can be issued a shopping letter. They would have to request it from Homebase, right? Homebase doesn't just know that this City FHEPS recipient is being sued or there's a health and safety reason. And after it's been requested, they get this letter. We'll talk more about the letter later, and they can use that to try to rent a place from prospective landlords. HRA issues shopping letters to Homebase or APS for the client for a new City FHEPS case in the community to stay or move. So remember the categories from before, right? if they qualify for APS services, APS would be the agency issuing the shopping letter. For the other categories, it's going to be Homebase.
So one of the documents we're giving you that Palente will send to you is a map of home bases for the for everybody's zip code. So a home base is a community agency that has a contract with a city to help people who have housing problems. And one of the things that home bases do is they are the only place where you can get city FHEPS processed if you live in the community. So it would be to stay or to move. Next. So generally shopping letters are good for 90 to 120 days. And the letters indicate the highest rent city FHEPS will pay for the household. The letters indicate how much the family has to pay if they have income other than cash assistance, welfare. There's also information about the Department of Social Services source of income discrimination unit, and they give their phone in case somebody goes to a landlord and the landlord says, I don't accept vouchers. Well, that's against the law. They can't discriminate against people because people have a shopping letter for FHEPS to move or a shopping letter for city FHEPS to move. And then they ask the landlord is going to need to give at least a 1-year lease, his tax information, which is called a W-9 form, and the landlord will be required to sign a statement of understanding about the city FHEPS program, that if he sells the building, he has to notify HRA, and he can't charge extra for the apartment. Next.
So I know there's a question in chat. I think we can cover that after we're done with the presentation, Susan. Is that?
Yeah.
Fine? Okay.
Yeah, we'll try to collect those towards the end.
Great, thanks. Okay, so this is how much city FHEPS pays currently. If you're on public assistance, you are receiving shelter allowance from HRA. If there's no income being budgeted, and your sole income is public assistance, then you would get the full shelter allowance. For a family of 3, that's $400 a month. So if you see, remember what I said earlier, if you are receiving city FHEPS and you have a cash assistance case and that's your only income, your share of the rent is the shelter allowance. So city FHEPS, the subsidy would pay the difference. So your shelter allowance is $400. City FHEPS will pay $1,180 for a family of 3 for a maximum rent of $1,580. If you have city FHEPS and you're a family of 3 and you're in an apartment and you're looking for an apartment, you can only rent an apartment at $1,580 or lower. That's what these max rents are.
So last week, the city council voted to increase the amounts that are paid by city FHEPS. The mayor has not yet signed that into law. However, we expect the city FHEPS levels to go up by January next year, and they should go up to Section 8 levels. So that will be $500 to $700 increases. So for a family of 1, instead of paying $1,265, they'll pay around $1,900 if the apartment costs that much. For a family of 3, it'll go above $2,000. So the hope is people are coming out of shelter will be able to find new apartments much more easily. and families in the community, if they have to move, will be able to find a new apartment because these rents are too low for 2021. Next. You want to do this, Andrew?
I think this one is yours. This is the slide that's a little bit tricky for me. I'm sorry. You can
Okay.
cover this one.
So, in addition to renting apartments, single people or families with no minor children, no children under 18 or under, there's also a single person could rent a room for $800 a month with City FHEPS in an apartment, or a house, or there are a few single room occupancy buildings left in primarily Manhattan, and the rent can be up to $1,047 in those types of buildings. Now, the rules are a little different when renting a room or a single room, or a room in an apartment, or in a single room occupancy building. If it's a rent stay of apartment, the tenant of record can't start charging above what the legal rent is in the apartment. And there can only be only 3 people in 3 different people in, let's say, a house that the landlord is renting 3 rooms out. Maybe they're sharing a floor in a 2-family house and the landlord is renting rooms out to each person. And they would have to have a shared living room and a shared kitchen. And another rule is then the landlord, if they're renting out rooms, they can't charge extra for heat or hot water or electricity. Next.
Okay, I alluded to this earlier. If everyone is on the cash assistance case and receiving full public assistance, so imagine a mother and adult child who's 20, they would be receiving a shelter allowance of $250 per month. Their share would then be $250. The maximum rental amount for 2 is for City FHEPS is $1,323. So we take the 1323, we subtract the 250. City FHEPS will be paying $1073 per month. Now, remember what we said about cash assistance. It's not necessarily tied to the City FHEPS. So if your cash assistance closes, and that City FHEPS subsidy would still go out, and the tenant would have to find some other way to get the $250 a month paid.
Next.
Next.
One of the requirements of City FHEPS is that there be a lease when the program starts, and the landlord cannot increase the rent for 1 year. After 1 year, if it's an unregulated apartment, there doesn't have to be a new lease, but the subsidy will continue as long as the person lives there. So the new law we hope to go into effect in December or January, there will be no limit on the years that a person can stay on the program. Currently, there's a 5-year limit on the program. And then at the time the person is getting approved for the program, HRA looks at new pay stubs for the person, or looks at how many people is in the home and on cash assistance to make sure, and then they set the rent for 1 year. So that rent, so the share is set for a year. And if, for example, somebody was receiving cash assistance of $215 a month and then started receiving SSI, they could just pay they'll stop getting their cash assistance of $215, but they can still pay a lower share than their 30% for that 1 year, because the share is set for the year, which is a nice part of the program. But they do allow, if the income goes down, to reduce your share. So there's a form that's online that a tenant could fill out by themselves and send to HRA to fix their share if they need to. Next.
Just a brief reminder to those who have showed up. We've got Spanish and English interpretation, and our Q&A and chat are active, and for accepting your questions. Thank you. Thanks, Susan.
Okay, Andrew.
Okay. Yep. So here's some differences and similarities between FHEPS and city FHEPS. The max subsidy is the same for the family size. So we saw the max rent levels before. Secondly, for FHEPS, for those that were here last week, if there's outside income, there's a calculation done. They have to pay 30% of their gross income or pro rata share of the rent, whichever is less. That's different from city FHEPS, where they just straight across pay 30% of their gross income. For FHEPS, it has to be an apartment or house. You can't have FHEPS and live in an SRO. With city FHEPS, you can if there are no children in the house. It can cover a room or an SRO, but the max rent level will be lower. For FHEPS, currently for FHEPS and city FHEPS, the max rents increase every year, and they're tied to the 1-year rent guideline board increase. Like Susan alluded to before, the new law passed by the city council will tie the city FHEPS levels to Section 8 levels, which is much higher. Next.
And there was a new law passed today in Albany by both houses to raise FHEPS levels, but we're not sure the governor will sign it. So if the governor doesn't sign it, Legal Aid will sue the governor again to get that raised next year. So only Homebase or Adult Protective Services can process city FHEPS cases. So if you wanna, if you know of a client or a friend who is in danger and can't take care of themselves, you could call 311, but be very careful about doing that, because if somebody's so disabled that they can't take care of themselves in a home, Adult Protective Services could decide to put that older person in a nursing home. But if the person maybe needs a home attendant and can manage and has enough ability to tell a home attendant, you know, what to cook for dinner and how to clean the apartment, and can call somebody when the home attendant doesn't show up, that's but is too disabled to do their laundry or cooking or cleaning, that would be a kind of person who might need Adult Protective Services. So it's very, very hard to get seniors or disabled persons city FHEPS in the community. Normally they have to be sued, and normally they have to be so disabled that Adult Protective Services is providing them a service. So this is very complicated, and it's something that's best handled by a lawyer. When the person has a housing case. And before then, you really want to speak to an organization like Palente about what to do about a friend or neighbor, a relative who needs help. Next.
working with Homebase. Like I said earlier, only Homebase and APS can submit city FHEPS applications to HRA. There are many Homebase agencies throughout the city. Most of them service only specific zip codes. So to find the Homebase that services your area, you should call 311, and they should be able to give you that information. Homebase, there are delays sometimes and in getting an appointment. Some may be booked out for 2 months. A lot of the home bases are also assisting now with this new program called ERAP applications. So I imagine they are very, very busy. So if you think you qualify for city FHEPS or for, then you should reach out to the home base as soon as possible. Document during returns. HRA requires that documents be no older than 30 to 60 days when you're working with Homebase. So if Homebase is requesting documents from you, then you should get the most recent ones. Don't demand work with Homebase. Yes, it's important to have a good relationship with Homebase and the Homebase worker that's assigned to their caseload is often very high, but it's important to work together. Must establish a weekly update with Homebase. Make sure you know when they submit the application. Ask for documentation when that's done. Follow up with HRA when it is approved. That's more of a tip for, I think, advocates who know who to follow up with. And refer early as soon as you do your intake. That's also more of an advocate tip.
Next. So lawyers will refer cases to Homebase, and then Homebases submit the application, or you may be working directly with a Homebase without a lawyer. Generally now, most people in housing court will be given a lawyer, which is a good thing, because if there are delays, the lawyer can help push Homebase or try to stall the court deadlines. So Homebase is going to need all the same information you would give if you were applying for government benefits, and a few additional things like the landlord's tax papers and a memo of understanding. Next.
Okay, so we learned last week that who processes FHEPS to stay, it's legal services providers like the Legal Aid Society and the Homeless Diversion Unit of HRA. So they process FHEPS applications, and city FHEPS processed by Homebase or Adult Protective Services. Next.
So during COVID, it's required that instead of a in-person inspection of your apartment, there be a virtual inspection. And so the Homebase will give you instructions to start walking from the street to the front door of the building and take pictures of the front door and the vestibule, and then walking down up to your apartment, and then going through each room slowly, looking at all sorts of details in the apartment, like light switches and where you plug the plug in, and every window pane. So with these inspections to move or stay, they expect the apartment to be in good shape, and similar to what would happen with a Section 8 apartment. The only difference is with Section 8, they would have a government inspector inspecting the apartment instead of a visual inspection. Next.
Yeah, they also check databases for violations. I believe they do this even before they schedule the inspection. right? So they want to make sure they check DOB for vacate orders, stop work orders, check the certificate of occupancy, Department of Finance to make sure that the deed matches the landlord's taxpayer ID or the corporation's taxpayer ID. Check HPD, see if there's heat, hot water, see if it's in the AEP alternate enforcement program. And then once that they've completed those checks and that's clear, that's when they usually schedule the inspection, because this information is publicly available online.
And they also check with the fire department and the Department of Health. And so, that's good things about the program. Whenever there are moves for FHEPS or city FHEPS, they do these checks. And for city FHEPS to stay, they do these checks. And that's really good because we want everybody to have a safe apartment. And if the government's paying a lot of money, we want the government to be making sure the apartments are in good repair. Next.
Sorry, Homebase, the city FHEPS packet is large. And again, they submit it to HRA or APS submits it. And then HRA then approves, rejects, or asks for more information. The checks are issued by the Landlord Ombudsman Service Unit. And the checks are given to Homebase, not necessarily the tenant or the attorney. And these days, checks are being mailed to landlords. There have been talks about having them like being direct deposited to landlords, but we haven't heard
There's
it.
a new system's going to start in September.
Okay. Next.
So moves in the community, for FHEPS, they pay less money than they do for city FHEPS. So that's another advantage of the city FHEPS program. When somebody has to move in the community for health and safety with FHEPS, they only pay a half a month's broker's fee. But with city FHEPS, they pay 15% of a year's rent to the broker. Both programs, they don't give the landlord cash for security deposit. They give a voucher that says that the person moves out and the landlord and there's damages, they'll pay up to a month's rent. There is a signing bonus for city FHEPS. So the landlord can get an extra $4,200 on top of the yearly rent by agreeing to sign for city FHEPS. If HRA is delayed in processing the papers and they make a mistake, they will pay an extra month's rent to the landlord for city FHEPS, but they won't do that for FHEPS. So city FHEPS has a lot of advantages over FHEPS, and sometimes landlords get really angry when they realize it's a FHEPS move versus a city FHEPS move. We hope in the future that the two programs will be the same and have the same incentives so that the landlords don't choose one program over another.
Yeah, it's concerning. Like the city council bill having passed, raising the city FHEPS levels to Section 8 levels, and the state one, we're unsure about the state one. So if the state doesn't pass it, the levels will be very different, and we're worried it will have a chilling effect on the FHEPS, like Susan's alluding to. Sorry, next.
You want me to do this?
This one, yes, I got it. Yeah, there is no annual recertification for FHEPS. If there's a change in household size, then there needs to be a FHEPS modification submitted. If the household is no longer receiving FHEPS, they can restore the subsidy within a year without having without a lawsuit requirement. And there's a 5-year time limit, similar to city FHEPS. With FHEPS, there is no annual recertification, but with FHEPS, you need to be on cash assistance. So there is a recertification process if you're on cash assistance, but that's not to be confused with, like, it's not a FHEPS recertification. With city FHEPS, there is an annual recertification. There's usually, if a city FHEPS recipient is usually sent the renewal packet. I don't recall how many months before, but what
A
the
few.
yeah, what the tenant has to do is they have to just fill it out and mail it back. A lot of times that gets lost or tenant doesn't fill it out. They can always fill it out afterward, but if that's the case, you should speak to an advocate to help you out with that process. Okay. The subsidy is set for 1 year. So after the annual recertification, that's it. There is no sort of process to increase the subsidy, if that makes sense. They can modify it if it helps the household. So if they are receiving substantially less income, they can change their share, but that requires advocacy. If it's the other way around, if it's their share is lower and they receive substantially more income, right, then it's sort of a windfall. Their share won't change, they have more income, and so that's a good thing. Subsidy can be restored for good cause if it's longer than a year. So that's something that you should speak to an advocate to. If your city FHEPS, you're no longer receiving city FHEPS because it was a recertification problem, like I see that often. That's been more than a year. It's possible to fix it.
Pretty quickly.
Yeah, pretty quickly. Okay, next. Oh, sorry, the new law, there's no time limit. There's no 5-year time limit. Next.
So city FHEPS is a city-run program. So fair hearings are not with New York State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance in Brooklyn. Fair hearings for city FHEPS are at East 16th Street in Manhattan. But generally, a lot of things can be resolved by an advocate with city FHEPS, and often usually you don't need the fair hearing, but it's always good to ask for the fair hearing and then try to get a lawyer, paralegal to represent you and try to resolve the issue. The city's much more flexible and about trying to resolve problems for people so they don't become homeless. And so it's an easier program than FHEPS. And we can also intervene sometimes with the city to help people. And so it's a good thing. Next.
That's it.
All right. So we would love to answer questions and help you with any problems you have.
Fantastic. We do have a good bunch. So I'll move into those. My first question actually that came in is going to be in Spanish, so hold on one moment. And hola, soy Eufrosina. Sí, yo tengo ese programa, fui aprobada, pero no pagan toda la renta. ¿Qué debo hacer?
Miss Sierra, it would be good for us to set up an appointment with you next week to talk about your individual problems, because it may be your income changed or the rent goes above what city FHEPS pays. So each case is going to be different based on who's in your home and what your income is. And of course, during the pandemic, a lot of people lost income.
And remember, city FHEPS, if there is income in the house, they don't, there is a share that you have to pay with city FHEPS. So they don't necessarily pay all of the rent. City FHEPS doesn't necessarily pay all the rent because you have a share.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm putting my email in the chat again. It's also on the PowerPoint that will be sent to you. So my name is Susan Bond, and that's my email. If you have access to email, that's the easiest way to reach me. I'm gonna give you my cell phone, but I need you to text me. And then because my Spanish is terrible and I'll have to get an interpreter to help. Okay. So text me next week or email me. Don't call because I'm always on the phone with another client. Okay.
I'm on public assistance and I owe more than a year on rent. I applied with HRA, but they said it was too much. They told me to apply for FHEPS and some others problems, but I don't know where to go or what to do. Please help me out. Thanks. They don't answer the phone. I left a couple messages. They never called back.
So all the welfare offices are, almost all the welfare offices are closed since the pandemic, since March 2020. There's only 1 or 2 welfare offices open, but they don't have the full staff there. So they're not answering the phone that much. So legal aid and legal services have helplines, and where we can assign somebody to help you over the phone. Andrew, can you look up on your phone the A to B helpline and legal services helpline?
Yeah, sorry, I was just Googling ERAP before because I think they'll probably have her apply for ERAP first before anything's
smart.
done.
Smart.
Right?
Yes.
So here's the ERAP is this new, it's federal monies that was given to individual states to help pay rental arrears. ERAP, they pay up to 12 months of arrears. It's not recoupable, meaning if it's paid, you do not have to pay it back, which is huge because HRA, a lot of times these one-shot deals, rent arrears grants, you have to pay it back.
And you don't have to have immigration status. So anybody can apply for the ERAP.
I'm going
and
to, sorry,
you
go
can
ahead.
you can go to a office that is being funded by HRA to help people apply for ERAP, but we are hearing that there are very long delays. So in the Bronx Works is getting 1,000 calls a day. So you might also call legal aid and legal services if you, after looking at the ERAP website, if you can't do if you're having problems with the application online.
Also, where we at Palante, we're also doing the ERAP applications.
Oh,
so
excellent.
If you do need assistance, you can call us 212-491-2541, and we can get you an appointment and help you out with it as well.
Yeah, I've also added the Manhattan official enrollers in the chat. But if Palante is offering, I would deal with Palante because they probably have a lot more capacity than the official enrollers right now.
Yo quiero aplicar, pero no puedo. Debo 1 año de renta. No sé quién me puede ayudar. No encuentro quién me ayude.
Okay, so ERAP is available for everybody, whether they have immigration status or not. And HRA is requiring everybody to apply for ERAP for 12 months of rent. If you owe more than 12 months of rent after you get approved for the ERAP money, then you could apply for more money through HRA. So if you have no income and you have immigration status and less than $2,000 in the bank, you should be applying for cash assistance and through the welfare department. So last week we gave out a flyer about how to apply for FHEPS online, but it also tells you how to apply for welfare online. So maybe, Jakari, we should send that out too, again, with the information tonight.
Okay.
How do I know what FHEPS is going to pay my landlord and how much I will have to pay?
So the government will tell you how much they'll pay and how much your share will be. So if you are on cash assistance and everybody in the house is receiving cash assistance welfare, let's say you are a family with a mom with 2 minor children, they would pay $400. And for a family of 3, they would allow you, if you qualify for FHEPS, they would pay up to the rent in the apartment. So if the rent were $1,300, that would be the rent that they're gonna figure out what welfare is gonna pay or your share from your work, and then they pay the difference. But there's a maximum rent they pay for each family size. So for a family of 3 or 4, right now the rent cannot be more than $1,580. So sometimes you have to get the landlord to lower the rent. Sometimes the landlord won't lower the rent. Sometimes you have to get FHEPS to move to a new apartment. So that's why people are fighting to get the amount that the government pays for state FHEPS and city FHEPS higher, because the rents these days are very high.
And there was a follow-up from the person who asked a previous question in Spanish about wanting to apply. And so should I call Palante? And thank you for your help.
Palante can give you more information, but only Homebase can help you with city FHEPS. And it's good to talk to Palante or Legal Aid or Legal Services to find out which program you might be eligible for. Unfortunately, with FHEPS and city FHEPS, not everybody's going to qualify. So a lot of senior citizens aren't going to qualify, or disabled people, for these programs, because there's only 4 groups of people who can get city FHEPS, right? You have to be a veteran. You have to live in a rent-controlled apartment, and most people don't. Or you have to have adult protective services. And that means you're really, really sick. You need a home attendant. So it's very hard to get city FHEPS. And FHEPS, you have to receive cash assistance and have a minor child in the house. So that's why it's always good to speak to an advocate like Palante or Legal Aid or Legal Services to see, or Housing Court Answers, to see which program you might qualify for. And right now there's a program called ERAP, which will help everybody with rent arrears. And we recommend you apply before June 30th, before the money's gone.
What about the new law of Intro 146? How long will that take? What if you just got an apartment? Will you be eligible for the increase? Can you use FHEPS in Westchester County or Long Island?
Wow. Lots of questions there. So let me take one at a time. So the new intro that is the new law that the city council voted for. The mayor hasn't signed it yet. And the law says they won't, the government has 180 days to process, to put in effect the new higher rent. So that's not going to be till January for the higher city FHEPS levels. Now, then there was a second question in there.
What if you just got an apartment? Will you be eligible for the increase? Can you use FHEPS in Westchester County or Long Island?
Okay, so if you moved into a new apartment and don't have a program, the program is only generally only people can get the program if they've been sued. But between now and August, if you can't afford your rent and your rent is within the chart of the PowerPoint or the papers that Plante is going to send to you, or you can Google City FHEPS and find out what they pay for your household size. Right now, if you qualify, you could get it without a lawsuit, but there's you're going to need a breakdown from the landlord, and they're going to have to say, or a rent demand or a letter saying, I'm going to sue Susan Bond if she's behind in the rent. She owes me 3 months of rent. And so then, and if I fit the city FHEPS rules, because I used to be in a DHS shelter, Department of Homeless Services shelter, then I could go to Homebase to see if I could get city FHEPS. Okay, and Westchester has a program similar to city FHEPS and state FHEPS, and it's similar, but I don't know the rules because I don't help people in Westchester. And Nassau and Suffolk counties have similar programs to state FHEPS. I think all the counties require, they have similar programs. So if you lived in that county, you would go to the legal services in Westchester or legal services in Nassau or legal services in Suffolk County, and they could tell you whether or not you qualify for the program.
My question, sorry, go ahead.
Something related to, someone is asking after Intro 146 passes, like, are they eligible for the increase, right? So,
well, the increase will be going forward in January. So if your rent goes up in January, then you could get a new increase if it's a legal increase.
yes.
But they're going to be looking at landlords trying to jump the rent $500. And so there may be special rules to try to prevent that from happening.
My question is that I just moved in 2 months ago. The landlord received a lot of money from City FHEPS program. Now the apartment was inspected and it passed, but now when I went to look at my stove, it was all melted and rusted, and my electric keeps going off every day. And I tell the landlord, no repairs are made. I worked hard to get where I am. I know City FHEPS says that you can't move before a year. I feel like my apartment is not safe. What should I do?
Andrew?
Yeah, you should call 311 and get HPD to inspect your apartment. If once an HPD inspector comes out, they'll look at your apartment, see if there are things in there that violate the housing maintenance code. The housing maintenance code is the laws about how that establishes housing standards, right? So like, you need to have heat if it's a certain temperature. You need to have hot water, electricity, operable stove, things like that. And once the HPD inspector comes out, they'll ask you what the conditions are, and they'll say, okay, yes, this condition is a violation. So you're right, it does violate the housing maintenance code. Or they'll say this condition is not a violation, that the condition you're reporting doesn't exist or isn't serious enough to qualify as a violation. Once the HB issues those violations and nothing is still being done, you can go to housing court or reach out to the Legal Aid Society to file a case in court. It's called an HP proceeding to sort of compel the landlord to make the necessary repairs. But the first step is to call 301 and get an HPD inspector out, because that sometimes makes the landlord start to do repairs, because HPD usually reaches out to the landlord to tell them about the violations.
One thing, you said your lights are going off, and one thing in New York City with older buildings, a lot of times the air conditioners cannot run if there's another appliance running. So I know my first apartment, I could not iron and run the air conditioner at the same time. So a lot of the old buildings have very old wiring and can only do one thing at a time. The newer buildings are much better for that. And so that's one thing to watch out if it's an older building. That they generally won't require the landlord to rewire the building.
After a tenant is in their apartment and starts to be harassed by the landlord or the management firm asking for other documents, where do the tenant turn to?
Andrew?
No, I'm speculating that it might have to do with ERAP, right? With ERAP, there's landlords can also apply for this money, and they need the tenant's cooperation. So, but it shouldn't rise to the level of harassment, right? Like, what can a tenant do? I mean, there's also a provision, I believe it's in the housing maintenance code, about tenant harassment. And if that's the case, then you should, a case can be filed in court.
In housing court.
In housing court, an HP proceeding based on tenant harassment.
But a lot of tenants are going to see landlords applying for back rent right now. The one thing that landlords may be asking the tenant is for their date of birth and for their date of birth. And then the state welfare can reach out to the tenant, or the tenant can apply online themselves and put information into the computer, like their social security numbers of everybody in the house. So you don't have to give that to the landlord directly, but a lot of times landlords need the date of birth to track down, they try to match to see if the tenant has applied for the program. And it's a great thing because it doesn't matter about your immigration status. It's not a loan, it's free money. It's from the federal government. It doesn't count against public charge. It's a good thing. It's like winning lotto for 12 months of rent. They also pay electric bills that happen from March 2020 to now.
Is HUD the governing agency for FHEPS?
No. FHEPS is a program that's the state welfare approved the program, and beginning right before the pandemic, January 2020, the city took over running the program. So that's what you can apply for FHEPS by, if you're applying for cash assistance and you check off, I need rent paid, HRA is supposed to process your case for FHEPS too if you and it's not the pandemic, or even during the pandemic, if you owe rent and have minor children in the house and your rent's within the FHEPS levels. So it's a program, not a federal program. It's a state program, and the city is currently running the program. So also legal services providers like legal aid and legal services can submit applications to HRA on your behalf if you have an open cash assistance case. City FHEPS is only done by Homebase. Valente can't do it. We can't do it. Only Homebase can do it.
And APS.
And APS.
Can landlord ask where you get your income from? Do you have to tell them you get FHEPS or city FHEPS?
So the landlords can, if you don't have a government program like Section 8 or FHEPS or city FHEPS, the landlord can ask about your income and how much you have, and if it's regular and recurring. So if you're working off the books, a lot of landlords are going to have problems with that kind of income because it's different from having an employer paying you every week on the books and with taxes. So lots of landlords. So if I'm renting an apartment, the landlord is going to ask for my pay stubs or my last year's tax return. But with FHEPS or city FHEPS, you have a shopping letter or with Section 8, a voucher where you give it to the landlord to show you have enough income to afford the apartment. And that is the city council years ago passed a law that they cannot discriminate against tenants whose source of income is from the government. And so HRA has a government unit that sues landlords or, tries to scare them to pay the rent. The Human Rights Commission in New York City also goes after landlords or brokers who don't deal with vouchers. Legal aid and legal services go after landlords who don't honor vouchers. So it's a way to help people who have government funding to get reasonable, affordable housing.
Individual applied for help from Homebase for city FHEPS in October 2020, interviewed in February 2021, but never given a decision. How can I get an advocate to help resolve this issue? I'm facing eviction and living in an overcrowded apartment.
You need a lawyer right now. You can call 311 to get a legal services attorney, or Palente has a few attorneys.
I actually have a legal program now, so you actually could get advice from an attorney that we have working with us. So yeah, you can call us.
Terrific. And legal aid and legal services also have attorneys, and you can call 311 and they'll direct you to an attorney. And so it's really, you need an attorney because it's sounds like a complicated case and a lot of rent is owed. And you probably need ERAP in the meantime.
I think this is a follow-up to something recently that came up. They still do it even when you have a voucher. Isn't there a workshop for landlords and city to understand the city FHEPS?
So we do give trainings to Legal Aid gives trainings about city FHEPS to landlords and to tenants and to and to advocates about the program because the rules are complicated. So if a landlord has a question, they could email me. I'd be happy to answer an email from a landlord. I do all the time. They just have to say, email me or text me and say, hey, I'm Joe Landlord. I have a question. And then I can set up time to, do you have time to talk to me today or tomorrow? And I'll set up time to talk to people. So we're happy to answer questions. I'm sure Palente is also.
Who are the brokers to applied FHEPS or city FHEPS?
So there is no list of brokers who deal with FHEPS or city FHEPS. It's illegal for brokers to say, I don't deal with vouchers. We know it happens. It will get better if the levels go up in January. Then all the brokers will be much happier to take it because there's not a lot of apartments for $1,265 for a single person or $1,580 for a family of 3 or 4. So if the programs are paying more money, it'll be easier to find a broker. But you can find brokers in your neighborhood. Is sometimes the best way to find a broker, or through friends or family who used a broker before and it was successful, or sometimes people find just by Googling brokers on the internet with a zip code. But probably the best is word of mouth. Homebase has lists of brokers in different neighborhoods, but it depends if they have apartments.
Is FHEPS or city FHEPS only to help renters?
Well, the programs help renters, and then because the renters have more money to rent, it helps landlords. So it helps both.
Is ERAP the same as a one-shot?
ERAP is like a one-shot, except one-shots generally are part a grant and part a loan. So for example, a family of 3 would get $400 a month for welfare. If they rent an apartment, if they need $1,500 a month, $400 will be free and clear. $1,100 a month is a loan. So the money from ERAP is free and clear. You don't have to pay a penny of it back. But generally with one shots, you have to pay part of the money back. And the higher the rent per month, the more you have to pay back. And so ERAP is free for 12 months of arrears, and they may also pay 3 months going forward. And then if you owe more than that, you could get a one shot, but that lowers the amount. The great thing about ERAP is it's around right now. You should apply before, next week or over the weekend if you can. It's a really great program. And if you have problems, call Palente.
Yeah.
Do these programs work for NYCHA residents if that are part of the 4 types of people who can apply?
So there are 4 types of people who can apply for city FHEPS. You can't get city FHEPS in a NYCHA apartment, but if people in a NYCHA apartment owe arrears, they may be able to get arrears through ERAP.
And that just about wraps up the bulk of the questions that came in. In fact.
Great questions, everybody.
Yep, thank you all.
Yes, so thank you, Susan and Andrew of the Legal Aid Society, for the information given to us tonight on City FHEPS. We will be sending out the literature for City FHEPS to you all. If you have any questions about tonight's webinar, you can call us at 2541, and we can, help you with any questions. And we mentioned ERAB tonight, and our next webinar will be a training on ERAB, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So please stay tuned for that invite. And yeah, so everybody have a good night, and we'll see you next webinar. Thank you to Andrew and Susan again. Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Robert, our interpreters.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys. Have a good weekend.
You too. Thank you.